Hey, I'm Josh. So Apple claims that the new MacBook Pro comes with a high impedance headphone jack. Today we're going to be testing that. Now I'm actually not going to be too harsh on Apple here. The way that I see this is that the headphone jack is a very, very small part of what this laptop can do. This model is a 2021 MacBook Pro. This does have something called an impedance detection, which is a detection of the impedance of the headphone that plug into this. Apparently, it will switch from 1.25 volts RMS for 150 ohms and less to 3 volts RMS for above 150 ohms. I'm also coming from the previous generation 13-inch MacBook Pro. Can confirm the headphone output of this on this side kind of sucks. So I'm hoping that this one's better. So if it's got a quiet noise floor, can power at least some headphones, and sounds remotely passable, I'm gonna consider this a big success. To sort of cross-reference quality of sound, I'm gonna be testing on a FIO K9 Pro, which is about, I think, an $800 DAC amp. That's gonna be plugging in. I'm gonna be switching from both, and I'm only gonna be using the single-ended output of this just so I can use the same cable on each. So the very first thing I'm gonna test is put this through a super high-end pair of IEMS called the Fur M5s. These kind of border the line of like hyper-efficient IEMS because they show you the noise floor on everything. So this is just gonna be a noise floor test. So I hear like the faintest hiss, the faintest. It's very, very light. I actually hear more of a noise floor on the FIO actually than this. I almost hear nothing. Like it's basically nothing. It's nothing that I would ever concern myself about. So yeah, like initial impressions on sound quality with these, it's pretty good. But again, those the noise floor though, that's very impressive because I pick up a noise floor on everything. And granted, this isn't a totally quiet environment, but basically no perceivable noise floor. Certainly not anything that I would clock as like a negative or noteworthy. Okay, so then I have a few dynamic headphones that I want to try. I want to start with an 8XX and the 560S. I think the 560S is probably going to be a pretty common headphone that's going to be paired with this. I'm kind of curious how it's going to perform because it's not super inefficient. In fact, I want to say that the efficiency is somewhere on like 150 ohms. So it's 120 ohms, but it does have a sensitivity of 110 dB. So it should be playable through this. No noise floor, of course. Okay, so I'm listening to Goldwing from Billie Eilish, and I'm really curious how the bass is gonna manifest differently because the top end sounds really, really clean. She's not the cleanest recordings, but I'm really curious more about the bass actually. You know, oddly enough, the bass seems pretty similar, but I feel like the top end is actually a little bit more active on the MacBook. I don't know if that's necessarily more accurate, but it does feel a little crispier on the top end than it does on this. I would assume that the FIO is probably a little bit more correct than this, but I want to try some other headphones and see sort of what those sound like. So I was about 3/4 up for the 560S for it to be loud and seemed pretty fulfilled, which is good. But like I said, it was a pretty efficient headphone, only 120 ohms, 110 dB per milliwatt. This is gonna be a much harder test. Not only are these 300 ohms, but I think the sound pressure level is also gonna be different. So I can't actually find the listed sound pressure level of the 8XX, but the 800S, which this is modeled off of, is about 102 dB. So this is a lot more difficult to drive than the 560S. So I think this will be a decent test. Let's start off with the classic Hotel California, the Eagles. I just realized that I've been using this headphone with EQ at home and not on this setup, so it sounds like dog shit right now. So this is maxed out on both Tidal and on the headphone output for the computer. It's barely what I would consider loud enough. It's loud enough, but it's not loud. It's not gonna get much louder. Yeah, I think this is pretty much getting to the limits of what this thing is capable of. So I think it's the resistance. Okay, so the same treble difference was not apparent here. Actually, the treble felt much more active on the FIO. I shouldn't say much more. It felt more active on the FIO though. I don't know if this is a drivability limitation of this. I tried to volume match as best as I could. The sound staging was also slightly better, wider, and kind of more full on the FIO. And the FIO just sounded better with this. So I think as far as this is a pairing, probably not. I'd probably get a dedicated amplifier for this. Now, I do think that the difference in sound here might be due to the impedance changes, switching from high to low gain on the output here. That was the gain switch that I was talking about before. Those may have different sound qualities. That's an interesting feature of this. So yeah, 800S, probably not. I think this is probably going to be, if I had to guess, more within this thing's wheelhouse. This is an Odyssey LCD-X. It's a studio headphone. It's designed as a studio headphone. It's very efficient, but it is a big planar. And even efficient planars can be hard to drive for some amplifiers. Not necessarily in terms of volume output, but in terms of sound quality. So I think this is gonna be a pretty good test. This headphone is about $1,200 and it is open back. So not all, professionals are gonna be looking for an open back headphone like that. So this headphone is only 20 ohms, but it actually has a lower sound pressure level than that 8XX, so I'm actually gonna be testing a theory here. This has a sound pressure level of 100 dB versus 104. Okay, yeah, this thing is pretty great. This definitely feels like it plays well within the capability of the computer. There's a couple differences though that I wanted to note here, and this has been kind of different for every headphone. The 8XX was a little bit darker on the laptop, and the 560S was a little bit brighter on the laptop. This doesn't seem brighter or darker in the treble response versus the FIO. It seems pretty on par with both, but the FIO does have slightly stronger bass response. Not significantly, and I don't know, it didn't really seem more informative. It just felt like more impactful. It didn't feel like it carried more detail or anything like that. So this is actually pretty impressive of a comparison here. There's definitely a little bit of a benefit to the FIO for this super efficient headphone, but that's kind of a well-designed headphone that's supposed to be efficient, so that it plays with stuff like this really well. So good design on the headphone. I was really paying attention to a little bit of bonus stuff. Like I said in the beginning, I wanted to just focus on is it clean enough? Is it powerful enough? And is it, even remotely usable? And it's definitely a yes on that. If you make sure you're getting low impedance headphones like this, a lot of closebacks will really work well for this. But there is actually some bonus stuff that I felt like was pretty good too, like the sound staging and imaging. I was listening to Yoshi Hirakawa's Fluid song, which is an excellent sound staging and imaging test and a good bass response test. And it's excellent on this laptop. Super clean noise floor, which is very impressive. Good imaging, good sound stage. The highs were some were a little bit more forward and some were a little bit darker, but they were always clean, so that's pretty good. And then the bass response kind of depended on the headphone. I never felt like it had more bass though than the FIO. I felt like the FIO always was either equivalent or edged it out a little bit. Like I said in the beginning, I'm gonna go pretty easy on this. I do think that this is a bit of a success. Now, I think that you want to find headphones that play with this, and this does not have unlimited capability for its headphone output. If you have a super inefficient headphone, this is not going to run it, but it is undoubtedly more capable than previous generations or onboard audio from something like my Windows computer. So for IEM users or people with efficient headphones, I think that this is going to be a wonderful amplifier where you probably don't have to upgrade. I would definitely try it first. Definitely not the reason to buy this, but as far as if you're in a pinch and you need something to run your headphones on, I think that this is perfectly adequate.